Okay, so the other thing we talked a little bit about that I was wondering about is this idea of dissent, right? That there need to be places where you say you don't agree.
Yeah,
Is social media the place where that should happen? Like because I think we've fallen into this trap of thinking that communication should be equal in all scenarios. So what I say to my girlfriend when we're having a conversation around dinner table, I should be okay with saying on social media, or I should be okay saying it in front of my a group of my peers. And I don't think that's the case. I think different levels of intimacy exist in every single one of those spheres.
yeah.
So different forms of communication take place. It's not the same everywhere. So my question is this is social media really the place where dissent should happen? Or is dissent something that should happen when you're sitting across from someone and saying, hey, look, I actually don't agree? Because I'm not sure that a platform. Okay, that was the question.
Yeah.
I'll let you answer.
Well, I think it's wiser to air out your opinions in front of someone. I think it's always wiser to, because you look them in the eye, you have human in interaction, you engage with people differently. Because as we just talked about, a lot of these social medias are designed to make you have an emotional response, and the more you argue out of emotions, the less likely you are to have a good constructive uh, conversation about someone else's different viewpoints.
But it's also very difficult to have a conversation with potentially thousands of people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
that's another dimension.
and I think and also the thing is, if I could, when I'm talking to you, maybe not exactly in this forum, but if we were talking just privately, or I'm talking with my father, and we're discussing these things, I don't necessarily regulate my language much because I can tell, no, he didn't like that, or he didn't understand that idea, and I correct.
Yeah,
If I were giving a speech to 1,000 people, I would regulate my language very, very much. And not necessarily because I'm afraid, so I self censor, but simply because I don't have the possibility of going around to every
yeah,
single person saying, did you get that? Did you understand? So
yeah,
I would be as clear as I possibly could be
yeah.
in my language so that there isn't, so there's, so that I, in an attempt to minimize the possibility of, of misunderstanding.
But you
So
would be the one doing it. You wouldn't have other people force you to be as clear as you can be.
but that's see but that's my yeah but my point is then that I don't think when you have when you are that clear in your language, that's not how debate happens, that's not how
Mm.
discussion happens.
Yeah,
Discussion happens when you're unclear in your language,
yeah,
which so I would argue that a speech in front of 1,000 people is not the kind of scenario in which you have a debate. And so I would take that example to Twitter, or yeah, let's just take Twitter. Is Twitter really the place where you can have? I would argue that it's not a place to have an informed discussion
no,
because it's
yeah,
more like the speech with 1,000 people in front of you.
yeah.
You can't speak one on one, and so you have to be, and so you can't. And for the same reason, maybe you don't, maybe on Twitter you're not very careful with your language because of the format, but you're not able to hash things out in the same
Mm.
way. And
Mm.
for that reason, you're not actually able to move your ideas forward.
Yeah,
And so I don't think, so I wonder if Twitter, if, so maybe going back, like, is this discussion, are we expecting something of Twitter that's impossible to expect? Because the thing that we hope happens on Twitter cannot happen on Twitter because it's not designed for that thing to happen.
I think that's a really interesting point to that you're bringing up, because it's almost as if we stumbled into this reality where all of a sudden Twitter, that's supposed to be one thing, has become an outlet for another thing. It's become a place where people gather and speak online. Facebook, the same, all of these platforms, and maybe they weren't intended to be that to begin with, But now they all of a sudden they have a monopoly, almost a monopoly on in that specific area where they were never supposed to they weren't intended to be that thing to begin with.
Yeah, they were never intended to be our public square. You think of the big public square in your city, in your village,
Yeah.
and you go there, and then you meet with your neighbor and you say, what's going on with this mayor? He's being a beep, bleep, 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 or whatever, or he's doing a great job. It's as if that's, I take your point to saying, to being, like, or the idea that they've become this public square where you talk with your neighbor about this when they're never designed to be that, because that kind of conversation has to happen
Mm.
in my perspective, at least. The conversation where you hash things out, where you try out ideas, is something that happens in a small scale. And but by thinking that that has to happen as well on a large scale with with potentially communicating with thousands of people, you can't have that. So, like you're saying, it's become, and I try to rephrase what you're saying a little bit. It's become our public square. It's become our place of public debate when it was never intended to be that. And for that reason, because it was never intended to be that, it's not designed to be able to have those conversations in a healthy, proactive way.
Yeah.
But because they're still happening there, they're becoming unhealthy, they're becoming destructive, and they're becoming divisive.
I think that's a really good explanation of where we are, and that might be a lot of the that that might contribute to a lot of the reason that we're in this position where all of a sudden governments are beginning to have to take action against, what essentially just was supposed to be a social platform, but they just grew and grew and they outdid everyone in competition. They bought up
Yeah.
other companies, and now all of a sudden they became something that they weren't supposed to be, and companies are beginning to have to take action against them. I think everyone's finding themselves in a position where they don't really know, like, really how we got here, like why did we get here, and where are we supposed to move on from here? Because we're not. I mean, there has to come some kind of alternative, and I'm sure there will at some point.
I think that's the big question. I was watching. I lived in Barcelona for a few months, and they've got the whole independence situation going on there. So I was watching a documentary about it, and one of the journalists, he said, "Look, people were lacking a vision. They were lacking something to strive towards. Some
Yeah.
kind of, like what you said. Where do we go?" So when this independence movement popped up, they're like, "Sweet, that's something I can latch onto. That's something I can go with." And I think that's a microcosm of a greater problem, which you're outlining there, which is we don't know where are we going. I don't think anyone has really, especially in the West, where we are so historically, if you look at the historical
Mm.
perspective, we've
Mm.
never been wealthier, we've never been healthier, we've never been safer. And it's taken us thousands of years to get here. And now we're in a situation where the goal that we had for thousands of years,
Survive, make it
it,
better.
yeah, make it better. How do we make it better now? It's not so easy to tell.
Yeah.
At least not in the West. If I lived in a poor developing nation, with all due respect to those nations, I think it's easier to say, no, no, we still know what we're striving for. But
Yeah.
here in the West, where we go on so incredibly lucky, what is the good life now? It's I don't know. I think most people have a harder time answering the question of what the good life is than your grandparents did. And because we don't know where we go, we I think that's the mental question. The idea of, like, how and why we got here.
Mm.
I mean, that's like, people can't agree on why World War One started. You ask historians, there's no clear answer, and that happened 100 years ago. So that we don't understand what's happening now is, at least far as I can tell, not a huge surprise.
Yeah. Seems normal.
Yeah. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there.
No, but it makes sense, and we talked about this before, but I think it's dangerous to take what brought you here and look at it and be like, no, we need to be different now. We need to have something radically different. It has to be, if you're moving forward too fast, you're gonna go outside of the platform that brought you here. If you think that Western, some people think that Western society is now the plague of humanity, when in reality it gave us so many good things like democracy and a bunch of different values that most people live their lives by.
I
It's
think the
it
problem is, yeah, continue.
it's just a shame to see this the wave of emotions that's being driven by big tech. Like, it's because you don't have aimed emotions at something. You don't have something to work at, like a goal that you're working towards, or a common enemy that you're fighting against. Now people are screaming at each other on Twitter about, I said, transgender bathrooms, right? That's an issue. It
Yeah,
it became so vague and so weird, and so I'm not talking about transgenders, but it became it. We got to a point where we used to have a common enemy. We used to want to survive. We used to have a bear trying to knock down the door of the cabin, and you're just barely making it through life, and then you have kids, and then you die, and they move on. And now we're
yeah,
here where we have democracy. We're the luckiest people to live in the best time in all of humanity up until now, in the best place in the world at the same time. And people are at each other's throats. I think there's something inherently inside of people that they need to fight something. And if you got so far that you no longer have a clear enemy in front of you, you're gonna make up some kind of enemy on Twitter where someone writes something and you have no idea what they really mean or what they really stand for, because they have like 200 and whatever characters to express themselves. So you end up in a
yeah,
situation where you're shadow boxing against some person
yeah,
that you've never met before, and you'll
yeah.
probably never see again.
I mean, the thing you were saying about people's criticisms of Western civilization, there are certainly things to criticize. I don't think that neither you or I would say that. But it is, again, I think, representative of this idea of like, I don't know, as you're saying, I don't know what to fight. I don't know where to go. So what is there left? Okay, I'll take that,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
and then
fight
go with
that.
it.
Um, and so what you're saying about and so this emotion that these companies are driving, as you're saying, it seems to be emotion for emotion's sake, discussions for discussion's sake. It's not necessarily directed somewhere. It's just saying, hey, these emotions are good for our bottom line, so let's have people have them.
Yeah,
And what you ended off with saying, this idea that people need to fight something. I think this not everyone is going to share this perspective, but I think you and I would share it. And this is the idea that humans, if we can dare to speak as broadly as saying that, but humans need meaning, right?
yeah, yeah.
You need to have something that you feel gives you meaning.
Thanks a lot for checking out this clip from the weekly live stream that we do every single Friday on the channel. If you want to join us live talking about different issues where you can chat with us at the same time, you can do so at 3 p.m. London time in Europe, or at 10 a.m. New York time in the States, or at midnight in Tokyo. See you in the next live stream every single Friday at those times.